Hey everyone. Okay, so obviously the first thing to talk about is Elsie and Justice come to blows in this episode, and it's through that fight that we get the big reveal of who these characters really are. Which is to say, it pretty much fully reveals Elsie's epithet of Pirate Princess isn't really all that much of a stretch from who she really was, because, again, as it's revealed through a brief flashback of their childhood together, Elsie and Justice, or James Halloway as he was called back then, was known were the prince and princess of a kingdom, or kingdoms who were forming an alliance through the plan of their marriage, of their eventual marriage. And as far as what's caused this whole relationship to collapse in on itself, and what caused them to lose everything, again, season 3 will likely have those answers. But in all honesty, though, this is an episode where you really got to pay attention to near every line of dialogue in their verbal exchange, or at the very least, you really got to keep a lot of things locked away in the back of your mind for later. Because looking back on this episode, I really wish I did. Because within every word, you can tell there's history with these two, deep-rooted history that has caused their current circumstance of animosity and opposition towards each other. Something that just flipped on its head. The very nice and wholesome scene we get, nice and wholesome backstory we get of just them as kids. Something flipped that on its head. It's more than just a personal connection. It's a broken one that was fractured by something that happened in their homeland, a war of some kind. Which, in retrospect to what I know from the manga and just how the story plays out from here and how it kind of ends for them, again, I really should have paid attention, because without giving too much away, this whole story of Justice and Elsie is not going to end in the same way it did for Urza and Jalal. Like, this is the turning point where Mashima laid the groundwork of saying they might look like his two most recognizable characters, but he does go in a different direction with it. My personal comparison for Elsie and Justice's story, honestly, is a twisted Romeo and Juliet story. If circumstances never really allow them to fall in love, or that's just the best comparison I can come up with. And trust me, the circumstances of that history, of what happened to their homeland in the K-Day cosmos, of just what caused the downfall of their kingdom, is fucked up. Really fucked up. I'm not even gonna sugarcoat it. The whole thing is just, yeah, it is just not. It is insane. With that said, though, I do want to talk about the exchange between Justice and Shiki, because first and foremost, the fact that Shiki was getting outpaced by Justice at every turn just further proves, even after their second chance of being able to defeat Dragon Joe, even then, it was kind of just a fluke. If Shiki is having this much trouble just trying to stay on even footing with Justice, then Shiki himself is still not prepared for the big dogs. He has the power, but he just doesn't have the combat discipline necessary to face people like that, like Justice, which in itself leads into the end of the episode, where he's saved by a tiny android who seemingly has the powers as himself and Ziggy, and is revealed as Xenolith, the man who taught Ziggy. And yeah, this is definitely where I should have really clued into just how much Mashima was heavily influenced by Star Wars when it came to Eden Zero, because Xenolith is literally Yoda, and that is who he is. And looking more closely at Ziggy himself, and I guess the whole thing of Foresta, you kind of say is like a more pretty version of Dagobah, but looking more closely at Ziggy himself, there is definitely influences with Vader and his design. Now, as far as who Ziggy is, as far as the question of who Ziggy or who Xenolith is, and well, the answer is pretty simple. For those anime onlys who have forgotten or unaware, Xenolith's introduction is more important than you think, because on top of being Ziggy's mentor, back in Season 1, we got informally introduced to a group called the Heavenly Knights of the Dancing Sakura, aka these motherfuckers. And that's essentially who Xenolith is. He's one of the heroes lost to time, but one whose existence continues to live on in the body of a robot. And to be frank about it, As a manga reader, Xenolith has presented a rather intriguing problem I've been having with his character as of late, which is to say, Xenolith does make a return later on in the series, but the thing that's kind of bugging me about Xenolith is to say we only learn as much as we need to learn about him from him, but we don't learn anything more than that, in the sense where obviously he is going to serve as a mentor to Shiki to help him grow stronger, but from the manga perspective, and I guess pseudo-spoilers in this regard, we haven't really learned anything beyond that in regards to his past as a knight, or what happened to himself or his comrades during their time fighting this great evil they supposedly fought. We don't learn really any of that. We just kind of learn what we need to from him at the time. It's kind of, he remains very much a mystery in that regard, and it's kind of annoying because I want Mashima to address it. I just don't know if he ever will. But yeah, and yeah, outside of all that, in the middle of Mueller continuing to prove how much of a psychopath he is, we also see him acknowledging Weiss as the younger Professor Weiss, as the man who made a discovery called the Bry theory. And that's kind of an interesting thing because it's never explicitly addressed in the series but about what that could be, but at the same time, there is a moment much later in the series where Connor talks about a process he went through, and it's likely that might be what it is. It's very likely, actually. But even beyond that, I always do like how we get to see these instances of Weiss having to learn about the legacy of his older counterpart, and just taking in the knowledge of who he is, as well as who he himself could eventually become in the series. For as much as Weiss may comically reject comparisons between himself and the Professor, I do like to think it is moments like this that does give him perspective of just who he could become, who he might be, and who he might be by the end of the series. Of course, like the psychotic sort of loser that he is, Mueller sends the robots on a rampage, and honestly, on that note, one thing I definitely will say about this episode is art. Well, the whole moment with the robots, I felt could have used less red filter, because I don't think it really need. It didn't feel like a moment that needed to be censored, honestly. But even aside from that little quibble, though, the art and animation in general was pretty damn good in this episode. I know the art and animation of season 2 has already kind of been a definite step up, and I'm not gonna say it's been bad with art and animation, and I'm not gonna say it's outright been bad, because again, it is definitely a step up from season 1, but it does feel like the animators are still kind of being selective of when to really focus in and give a certain moment or scene high quality treatment. And the whole Justice and Elsie fight definitely got the bulk of it, whereas everything else, while not bad, definitely kind of maybe suffered a little bit. It didn't suffer a lot, but didn't suffer to the point of being bad, but it did suffer where it could have used a little bit of tweaking. But yeah, guys, that's pretty much all I got for this review. If you enjoyed the video, like, comment, subscribe, follow me on Twitter, Analyst Crunchyroll. Be sure to notification bell, hit the subscribe button, and just share it around, guys. Dark Knight signing off. Later, everyone.